Hello, welcome to the channel Y Stories. Enjoy watching.
Wonderful. Now there's someone to do the cleaning. You'll start with the toilets, declared my future mother-in-law during the first meeting at her two-story 450 square meter cottage. When she handed me the mop, I did something that made her wear long-sleeved clothes for a whole month afterward. Esperanza nervously squeezed the strap of her handbag, looking out the car window. The scenery outside changed gradually. Apartment blocks gave way to luxurious cottages buried in greenery. Patricio, sitting behind the wheel, kept throwing worried glances at her and adjusted his tie for the third time. "Are you sure you're ready?" he asked, stopping at a traffic light. "My mother can be a little peculiar." "Peculiar?" Esperanza echoed with a smile. "You've been preparing me for this meeting for a week as if I were going to be interrogated by a national security agency, not meeting your parents." Patricio grunted vaguely and corrected his tie again. He looked unusual in such formal clothes. Normally he preferred jeans and t-shirts, but today was a special day. "Just keep in mind that my mother has very strict ideas about what a wife for her son should be," he sighed as the light turned green. "She was raised with very traditional values." "Don't worry, I'll be polite," Esperanza patted his shoulder. "I'm a judo coach, I can take a hit and control my emotions." Patricio gave a faint smile, though it was obvious the joke didn't relax him much. "By the way, where does your father work? You barely talk about him," Esperanza asked, trying to distract him from his nerves. "He owns a construction company. He's away on a business trip in the mountains, launching a new project, but he promised to be back for dinner. And he and Mom are, well, a peculiar pair." There it is again, peculiar, Esperanza thought, but let it go. Soon Patricio turned onto a wide driveway lined with slender thuja trees. At the end of it stood a two-story mansion with columns and huge panoramic windows. The house looked like an illustration from a luxury lifestyle magazine. Big, imposing, unsmiling, with a perfectly maintained yard. "Impressive," Esperanza breathed. "You didn't tell me you grew up in a palace." Patricio shrugged as though it were nothing special. "Just a house. My parents built it when I was 12. Before that we lived in an ordinary 3-bedroom apartment downtown." They drove up to the gates, and Patricio pressed a button on the remote. The massive doors slowly opened, letting the car into a granite-paved courtyard in front of the house. "Last chance to change your mind," Patricio joked, though there was a nervous tremor in his voice. "Don't even think about it," Esperanza took his hand. "We're just meeting your mom. What could possibly go wrong?" Patricio helped her out of the car. Esperanza checked her outfit one last time. A blue sheath dress, low heels, minimal jewelry. She had planned this look all week, elegant but not flashy. Looking at the marble steps leading to the entrance, she thought involuntarily about her own home. A regular middle-class apartment on the city outskirts where she grew up with her teacher mother. The contrast was striking. "So, shall we?" Patricio offered his arm, and they went up the steps together. They didn't even have to ring the bell. The door flew open. A stylish woman in a sand-colored silk suit stood at the threshold. Her chestnut hair was arranged in an elaborate hairstyle, and flawless makeup highlighted her refined features. Despite being around 50, as Esperanza guessed, she looked stunning. "Patricio!" she exclaimed, opening her arms. "Finally! I've been waiting." Patricio awkwardly hugged his mother and then stepped aside. "Mom, this is Esperanza." "Esperanza, my mother, Remedios." The woman slowly turned her gaze to Esperanza. Her smile froze, and her eyes became a scanner, analyzing every detail of Esperanza's appearance. The girl suddenly felt like livestock at an agricultural exhibition. "Very nice to meet you," Remedios said in a tone that did not match her words at all. "Come in." She stepped aside to let them into a spacious hallway. Esperanza paused, struck by the interior. High ceilings with moldings, marble floors, elegant furniture that probably cost more than her mother's entire apartment. "Impressive, isn't it?" Remedios noted, seeing her reaction. "My husband and I put a lot of effort into this house. Every detail was custom selected." "It's very beautiful," Esperanza replied honestly. Remedios nodded as if confirming something obvious. "Aurelio is running late, but he asked us to start without him, she informed them. Perhaps I can show you the house in the meantime? I'm sure you'll find it interesting, Esperanza. Patricio sent Esperanza a warning look, but she was already nodding. With pleasure, she said, though her gut told her that this tour would not lead anywhere good. They began on the first floor. Remedios walked ahead, pointing out furniture like a queen showing off her estate. This is the living dining room, she said, gesturing to a room with a huge dark wood table. The dinner set is from France, handcrafted. Each plate costs as much as a good smartphone. We have a special person to wash it. You can't trust such value to an ordinary cleaning lady. Esperanza nodded, unsure what to say. Remedios continued. Here is the library. Some books are over 100 years old. They require special care. You have to dust them daily, otherwise mold can develop. With each room, the stories about the difficulties of maintaining luxury grew more detailed. Esperanza began to understand what the future mother-in-law was hinting at, but kept a polite smile. And here is my pride, an antique vase collection. Remedios pointed at glass cabinets in one of the sitting rooms. Some pieces date back to the 19th century. Imagine how much effort it takes to maintain the proper humidity level. Esperanza leaned closer to examine the delicate items. Amazing, she admitted sincerely. You have excellent taste, Remedios. A faint flash of satisfaction passed across the woman's face but quickly disappeared. Patricio, darling, would you bring us something to drink? I'm sure you had a long drive. Patricio hesitated, clearly unwilling to leave Esperanza alone with his mother, but Remedios was already guiding him toward the doorway. Go on, you know where everything is. And Esperanza and I will talk a little, get to know each other better. When Patricio reluctantly left, Remedios turned to Esperanza. Her smile tightened further. So, tell me about yourself, dear. What do your parents do? My mother teaches literature at a school, Esperanza replied. And I never knew my father. He left when I was 3. Remedios made a sound that somehow combined sympathy and satisfaction. How sad. A broken home always leaves a mark. Esperanza felt a wave of irritation rise inside her but held herself together. I think what matters is not the number of parents but the quality of upbringing, she answered calmly. Of course, Remedios agreed quickly, though her tone suggested the opposite. And what do you do yourself? I'm a judo coach at a sports school. Remedios' eyebrows shot up. Judo? What an unusual choice for a girl. And how long have you been doing that sport? Since I was 7. I have a black belt and several regional medals. Remedios let out a strained laugh. How interesting. But you know, in our family the women have traditionally chosen more feminine pursuits. I, for example, dedicated many years to my home and family. Keeping a household is a great art. She ran a hand along the polished surface of an antique chest of drawers. A house like this requires constant attention and care. Not everyone is capable of handling it. Esperanza nodded, deciding not to take the bait. Let's continue the tour, she suggested. The house is truly impressive. I'd like to see the rest. Remedios gave a satisfied smile. Of course, dear, I'll show you the second floor. That's where the bedrooms and private rooms are. Patricio will find us once he prepares the drinks. They walked up the wide staircase with carved railings. Remedios went on with her monologue about the difficulties of maintaining such a large space. There are 5 guest bedrooms in this hallway, each with its own bathroom. Can you imagine how much time it takes to keep all of this spotless? And my husband's friends come over every week, important businessmen, politicians. Everything has to shine. Do you have a housekeeper? Esperanza asked cautiously. I used to, Remedios sighed, but I had to let her go. Imagine, she used regular cleaner on the marble floors. Almost ruined the hall. Now I have to do everything myself. Esperanza couldn't help noting that Remedios' perfectly manicured hands didn't look like the hands of a woman who scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets for hours, but she kept silent. They toured the master bedroom, a huge space with panoramic windows and a king-size bed, Aurelio's private office with leather chairs and a massive desk, and Patricio's childhood room, still preserved from his teenage years. Patricio was always a tidy boy, Remedios said proudly. I taught him order from a young age. I'm sure he'll expect the same from his future partner." She emphasized the last words with a special undertone as she stared at Esperanza. The girl returned the look without blinking. "Patricio is indeed very organized," she agreed. "It's one of the qualities I admire in him." They went back downstairs and entered the main living room, a spacious area with high ceilings, soft sofas, and a large fireplace along the far wall. "And this is my favorite place in the house," Remedios said, pointing at the fireplace. A real one, fully functional. The marble was imported from Italy. Imagine how much time it takes to clean after each use. Esperanza stepped closer, examining the intricate carvings on the mantel. "It's stunning," she admitted honestly. "Yes, it cost a small fortune," Remedios sighed. "But beauty requires sacrifice. As does maintaining that beauty, wouldn't you agree?" At that moment, Esperanza noticed a shift in her mother-in-law's expression. The smile widened, but the eyes remained cold and calculating. Something told her she was about to hear the real purpose of this entire luxury tour. "You know, Esperanza, I'm so glad Patricio finally found a girl," Remedios began in a deceptively gentle tone. "These last few years have been exhausting for me, keeping everything in order, and on top of that, charity events, meetings with my husband's partner's wives." She paused dramatically. How wonderful it would be to have a young, energetic helper in the house. Remedios gave Esperanza a meaningful look. "A woman who could share the household responsibilities with me. After all, this is your future home as well, isn't it?" Esperanza felt her muscles tense. What had started as a simple introduction was turning into a job interview for an unpaid maid. "We haven't discussed yet where we'll live after the wedding," she replied carefully. "We have options." Remedios laughed as if she'd heard a ridiculous joke. "What options, dear? An apartment in some residential block? Why, when there's so much space here. Of course you'll live here. Patricio has always dreamed of staying in the family home. He's just too shy to tell you." Esperanza struggled to stay calm. All her years of training in the dojo, learning to control emotions even in the most intense matches, were suddenly very useful. "Funny, Patricio told me something quite different," she said evenly. "But I think we should discuss this together." Remedios frowned but quickly restored her smile. Of course, discuss it. I'm sure he'll explain everything. And meanwhile," she suddenly stepped aside and opened the built-in closet, pulling out a mop with a long wooden handle. "Perhaps you'd like to get acquainted with the house in a more practical way?" Esperanza stared at the mop held out to her in confusion. "Excuse me? Well, since you plan to become part of the family, why not start settling in?" Remedios continued to smile, but her voice no longer hid its commanding tone. "You can start with the bathrooms. We have 6 of them, all in need of regular cleaning. The toilets especially require attention." At that moment Patricio appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with glasses of lemonade. Seeing his mother holding the mop, he froze. His face turned red up to the hairline. "Mom, what are you doing?" he croaked. Remedios shrugged innocently. "Just showing Esperanza how things work around here. She needs to know what awaits her if you two decide to live here. And of course you will. Where else could you find conditions like these?" Patricio stood silently, shifting his gaze from his mother to Esperanza and back again. It seemed he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Esperanza felt something click inside her. Her entire childhood spent in the sports hall, every training session, every tournament, every moment when she learned how to win, all of it suddenly felt like preparation for this exact moment. Remedios, seeing her son's confusion, gave a triumphant smile and extended the mop toward Esperanza again. "Wonderful. Now there's someone to clean. You'll start with the toilets," she declared in the confident tone of a person who is used to everyone obeying her will. Esperanza glanced at the mop, then at Patricio's flushed face. He looked like he might melt from embarrassment, yet he still said nothing. And in that moment, she knew exactly what she would do next. Esperanza slowly reached out and took the mop. For a brief second, satisfaction flickered in Remedios' eyes. She clearly thought she had won this silent battle. Patricio stood with his shoulders slumped, the tray in his hands trembling slightly. Inside Esperanza, something snapped into place. All those years of training, all the matches that required split-second decisions, came rushing back. She had always known how to act on instinct. And right now, her instinct told her one thing: do not retreat. A fine mop, she said, weighing it in her hand. Good wood, solid balance. You could use it for cleaning or for other tasks. She smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. Esperanza spun the mop lightly, almost like demonstrating a martial arts move. Remedios took a small step back, sensing danger on a purely instinctive level. What are you doing? She asked, her voice already less confident. Esperanza kept smiling as she took a slow step toward her mother-in-law. Demonstrating that I know how to handle equipment. You wanted to assess my skills, didn't you? Remedios gave a nervous laugh and took another step back. I only suggested you start getting used to the house as its future mistress. Mistress? Esperanza repeated. Interesting choice of word. Usually, the mistress of the house doesn't scrub the toilets. That's what staff are for, isn't it? Now they were circling each other around the living room like two fencers on a piste. Patricio finally snapped out of his shock and set the tray down on the nearest table. Mom, stop it, he said, but his voice wavered. You promised to be polite. I am polite, Remedios protested, though her gaze never left the mop in Esperanza's hands. I'm just explaining the rules of the house. Every family has its own. Esperanza stepped closer again. The mop moved smoothly in her hands, like an extension of her body. In my family there is a rule: treat others the way you want to be treated, she said calmly. Would you like it if I welcomed you into my home and immediately told you to scrub the toilets? Remedios scoffed. You don't even have your own home. What could you offer my son? A rented apartment? A trainer's salary in some shabby sports school? Patricio tensed and took a step forward. Mom, that's enough. Be quiet, Patricio, Remedios snapped. You've always been too soft. Someone has to think about your future. And this athlete is clearly after your money, or rather, after our money. Esperanza felt anger boil inside her. She'd been through too much to let some pampered, arrogant woman humiliate her. Years of hard training, competitions, victories, and defeats had taught her one thing: never let others define your worth. Her coach always said that in judo, it's important not only to know how to attack, but to know when. And this was exactly that moment. Esperanza shifted her grip on the mop, and with a swift, precise movement, struck the wooden handle against Remedios' kneecap. It was a controlled hit, enough to hurt, but not enough to injure. Remedios yelped and doubled over, clutching her knee. What are you doing? She shrieked. Patricio, she attacked me. But Esperanza was already taking her next step. A second, measured strike landed on Remedios' elbow, making her cry out again. A third, a light tap on the shin. And Remedios, losing balance, collapsed onto the expensive Persian rug. You're insane. She groaned, clutching her bruises. I'll call the police. This is assault. Patricio, call the police right now. Esperanza calmly returned the mop to the exact spot on the wall where Remedios had taken it from. This wasn't assault. It was self-defense, she said calmly. Any lawyer will confirm that psychological abuse is also a form of aggression. You started first. She turned to Patricio, who stood with his mouth open, staring at both of them. Thank you for introducing me to your parents, Patricio. Very educational. I think I should go. Esperanza walked toward the exit with dignity, as if nothing unusual had happened. In the hall, she picked up her handbag and headed for the door. Patricio! Remedios screamed from the living room. Don't just stand there. Stop her. Call the police. Esperanza didn't look back. She knew she was leaving this house, and possibly Patricio's life, forever. And strangely, she felt relief. Better to learn the truth now than after the wedding. She had almost reached the gate when she heard hurried footsteps behind her. Esperanza, wait. Patricio caught up to her, out of breath. Please don't leave like this. She turned around. Patricio looked lost and somehow renewed, as if an invisible mask had fallen from his face. What do you want, Patricio? She asked wearily. I just beat your mother with a mop. Aren't you supposed to be furious? To her surprise, there was no anger in his eyes. Instead, she saw something like admiration. You have no idea how long I've dreamed of seeing something like that, he said quietly. All my life she has bossed me around, my father, everyone, and no one ever dared to stand up to her. Esperanza looked at him skeptically. You're not angry? I am, Patricio nodded, but not at you. At myself. For letting this happen, for not warning you what meeting my mother is really like, for standing there and saying nothing when I should have stepped in. He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up. I've dreamed my whole life that someone would finally put her in her place, but I never had the courage. My father didn't either. He goes on business trips just to avoid running into her. And then you show up and in 5 minutes do what I never even dared to imagine. Esperanza gave a slight smile, though she still kept her distance. So what now? Your mother is probably calling the police already. Patricio shook his head. She cares too much about her reputation. Imagine the headlines. Famous businessman's wife gets into a fight with her son's girlfriend. She'd rather die than allow that kind of scandal. He stepped closer. Esperanza, please, give me a chance. I know I acted like a coward, but I'll do better, I promise. It's not just about you, Esperanza countered. Your mother literally just offered me a job as her maid, and judging by the way you stayed silent, you didn't seem to mind. I was in shock, Patricio exclaimed. I know that's no excuse, but I swear, I've never thought of you as a maid. We always talked about living on our own. Esperanza crossed her arms. And your mother told me you always dreamed of staying in the family home. Patricio let out a bitter laugh. And you believed her? Esperanza, I've been dreaming of escaping this place since I was 16. Why do you think I rent an apartment when there are tons of empty rooms here? I'd rather live in a tent than come back under her wing. He sounded sincere. Esperanza softened a little. So you're not angry about the mop? It was magnificent. I only regret I didn't record it. It's the first time in her life she met someone who didn't bow before her. He took Esperanza's hands. You know, when I was a kid, I had a book of fairy tales. In one of the stories, there was a witch who turned people into slaves. And only someone who wasn't afraid of her could break the spell. Today you broke some kind of spell that's been hanging over me my whole life. Esperanza still hesitated. Patricio, I don't want to be the cause of conflict in your family. Maybe we should take a break, think things through? No, he said firmly, no breaks. For the first time I saw how my mother treats people from an outsider's perspective, and I'm ashamed. Ashamed that I tolerated it for so long. But no more. He suddenly dropped to one knee, right there on the driveway. Esperanza, I know this isn't the most romantic moment, but I love you and want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me? Esperanza stared down at him, stunned. Are you insane? I literally just beat up your mother. Technically you just showed her how to use a mop, he smirked. And honestly, it might be the best thing anyone has done for her in the last 20 years. Esperanza couldn't help but smile. The whole situation was absurd. Don't you think proposing after meeting your parents like this is not the wisest idea? On the contrary, Patricio said, right now I'm more sure than ever. You're the only one who ever stood up to my mother. You're strong, brave, and incredible, and I don't want to lose you. At that moment, a piercing scream came from the house. Patricio, come back here immediately. That girl broke my knee. Esperanza winced. Didn't break it, just bruised it, she muttered. I know exactly where and how hard to strike. Patricio stood up and pulled her into his arms. I know, and I absolutely love that about you. You still haven't answered my question. Esperanza sighed. This is madness, you realize that? Your mother will hate me for the rest of her life. She'd hate any girl I brought home, Patricio shrugged. At least you gave her an actual reason. So what do you say? Esperanza considered for a moment. Everything felt like a surreal, fever dream blur. But she also saw something new in his eyes, determination she had never noticed before. All right, she finally said, but with a few conditions. Anything, he agreed instantly. First, we live separately. No shared homes with your mother. Patricio nodded eagerly. I'm already looking for a place for us. Or a house. Whichever you prefer. Second, you learn to stand up to your parents. I'm not going to swing a mop every time we need to protect our boundaries. I promise, he said seriously. I learned a lot today. And third, Esperanza lowered her voice. No rings and no official proposals until this whole mess settles. Let's consider ourselves engaged in our hearts and save the official part for better times. Patricio smiled. Deal, but I'm still going to buy a ring. And one day, when you least expect it, I'll give you a real, beautiful proposal. From the house, Remedio's voice echoed again, now hysterical. Patricio, if you don't come back right now, I'm calling your father. Patricio rolled his eyes. All right, he said decisively, let's get out of here. We'll go to my apartment, order pizza, and forget this nightmare ever happened. What about your mother? Esperanza asked uncertainly. She really might call the police. She won't, Patricio said with confidence. I know her too well. She'll scream and threaten, but she won't take any official steps. She's terrified of scandal. She'll probably tell everyone she fell down the stairs. He took Esperanza's hand. So, ready to get out of here? She nodded, feeling the tension finally start to fade. Let's go. And just so we're clear, I'm not apologizing to your mother. She deserved every hit. I'd never ask you to, Patricio replied, opening the car door. Honestly, I'm glad it happened. It was liberating. As they drove out of the estate, Esperanza cast one last glance at the mansion. In one of the second-floor windows, she noticed Remedio's silhouette watching them leave. Even from a distance, the hatred radiating from that figure was palpable. This isn't over, Esperanza thought, but strangely, the idea didn't scare her. She had always loved challenges, and this one promised to be especially interesting. What are you thinking about? Patricio asked as he steered onto the main road. About the fact that your mother isn't the type to give up easily, Esperanza replied honestly. I'm afraid this is just the beginning of a war. Patricio smiled, but this time his smile carried a new firmness. Well, then she should remember one thing. What thing? That she declared war on a judo champion, and this time I'll be fighting on the right side. Esperanza laughed, and for the first time that day, it was a light, genuine laugh. Many trials awaited them, but somehow, sitting in that car, driving away from the Montes family home, she felt stronger than ever. A month after the infamous meeting with Patricio's parents passed in a strange, tense silence. Remedios didn't call, didn't text, and seemed to have completely vanished from her son's life. Patricio tried several times to reach his father, but he replied briefly, citing busyness and promising to discuss everything later. She's lying low, Esperanza said one day as they sat in a cafe near the sports school where she worked. Like a predator before it jumps. Patricio stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. You know, this is the longest period in my life when my mother hasn't controlled every step I take. Hard to believe. Enjoying the freedom? Esperanza smiled, watching the changes in him over that month. His shoulders seemed broader, his voice steadier, and he no longer checked his phone every 10 minutes in fear of a message from his mother. That's an understatement, he said, taking her hand. By the way, I finally arranged a viewing of that apartment in the center. The realtor will show it tomorrow at 6. Want to come with me? Esperanza nodded. After the mop incident, they decided to speed up their move-in plans. Patricio, as if freed from invisible chains, threw himself into apartment hunting with enthusiasm. Of course, I have classes until 5:30, so I might be a little late. No problem, I'll wait, he said, taking a sip. I have a feeling my mother is planning something. This silence, it's not like her. Esperanza shrugged. What can she do? I'm not afraid of mops. She winked, but Patricio remained serious. You don't know my mother. She never forgives and she knows how to wait for the right moment. I'm worried not for myself, but for you. Oh, come on. Esperanza waved him off. I've been on the tatami since I was 7. Your mother is scary, sure, but not scarier than my first coach. She used to throw us over her hip if we forgot to bow before entering the dojo. Patricio finally smiled, though the worried crease between his brows didn't disappear. Just be careful, okay? Remedios doesn't attack head-on. Her methods are more refined. Everything will be fine, Esperanza said confidently. I can handle your mother, and you can handle the apartment. I can already picture our little nest, without marble toilets and mops. Patricio laughed, and the conversation drifted to more pleasant topics: the layout of the apartment, furniture they'd need, weekend plans. But Patricio's instinct proved right. Remedios hadn't forgotten or forgiven her humiliation. She was simply waiting. And the moment came a week later, when Patricio and Esperanza, thrilled about securing the apartment, decided to celebrate at a restaurant. Esperanza was running late. Her last student got a minor injury, and she had stayed to help with first aid. She hurried, typing a message to Patricio, when she noticed a familiar silhouette near the sports school. Remedios stood by her black Mercedes, impeccably dressed, wearing her signature cold smile. Upon seeing Esperanza, she waved. "Good evening, dear," she cooed, as if nothing had ever happened between them. "You look tired. Long day?" Esperanza stopped at a safe distance, instinctively shifting into a stance that would let her react to any aggression. "Hello, Remedios. What brings you here? Patricio isn't around." "Oh, I know," the older woman smiled wider. "I came to see you. I wanted to talk. Without witnesses." Esperanza glanced around. The sports school grounds were nearly empty. The last coworkers were leaving through another exit. She was alone with Remedios in the dim courtyard. "I'm in a hurry," Esperanza said, pointing at her watch. "Patricio and I have plans. This will take 5 minutes." Remedios gestured toward her car. "Shall we sit? It's warmer inside." "I'll stand, thanks," Esperanza replied firmly. The older woman sighed with exaggerated regret. "As you wish. In any case, I come in peace. And with an offer." She opened her purse and pulled out a checkbook, clearly prepared in advance. "I've been observing you and Patricio this month and realized I underestimated you." Remedios began filling out a check without even looking at Esperanza. "You're smart, strong, maybe even too strong for my son." She tore out the check and handed it to Esperanza. The amount had 5 zeros. "What's this?" Esperanza didn't move to take it. "Compensation," Remedios said calmly, "for leaving Patricio. Admit it, the sum is several times your annual income. You could start a new life. Maybe even open your own sports school." Esperanza stared at her, stunned. "You're offering me money to dump your son?" Remedios shrugged as if discussing curtains, not her child's future. "I'm offering you an opportunity. You're young, beautiful, talented. Why tie your life to our family? You've seen our complicated dynamics. It will never end, Esperanza. I will always be part of Patricio's life, and therefore part of yours." She waved the check. "Think about it. With this money you could leave, start fresh, no scandals, no mob fighting, no stress." Esperanza felt anger rise, but years of discipline kept her emotions in check. "And what does Patricio get?" she asked calmly. "Are you freeing him too?" Remedios laughed a short, sharp laugh. "Patricio is my son. He will never be free of the family. And you know the saddest part? Deep down, he doesn't want freedom. He's used to comfort, to us solving his problems." She paused, observing Esperanza's reaction closely. "You're not the first girl he's introduced, and I doubt you'll be the last. Patricio gets infatuated easily. Today he thinks he's in love, tomorrow he'll meet someone else, and the cycle begins again." Esperanza stayed silent, though every word hit like a needle, especially the part about not the first girl. Over the past month she had noticed how easily Patricio bent to outside influence, how impulsively he made decisions. Even his sudden proposal after the mop incident, had it been a genuine decision or just an emotional outburst? Seeing her words land, Remedios continued. "I don't want a war, Esperanza. Unlike many, I know how to admit defeat. You managed to stand up to me. I respect that. But think about your future. Imagine yourself in 5, 10 years. Constant conflict, tension, never being able to set your own rules because the family will always be there." She extended the check again. "This isn't a bribe. It's recognition of your victory. You can walk away with your head held high and with the resources to build a new life. Without us." Esperanza finally reached out and took the check. Remedios smiled triumphantly, far too soon. In one smooth motion, Esperanza tore the paper into tiny pieces and let them fall to the asphalt. "Tell Aurelio he should invest his money in charity. Or in a new mop." She smiled as Remedio's face twisted with rage. And one more thing. Patricio decides for himself who he wants to be with. That's his choice. Not yours, and not even mine. Remedio straightened, no longer hiding the hatred in her eyes. You'll regret this, she hissed. It always ends the same way. Girlfriends come and go, but a mother stays forever. Maybe, Esperanza agreed. But do you know the difference between you and me? I love Patricio for who he is. You love the version of a son you created. She turned to leave, but Remedios suddenly grabbed her by the hand. You have no idea what you're getting into, she said with a strange mix of anger and pity. Our family isn't as simple as it looks. Esperanza gently but firmly freed herself from the grip. I can guess, she replied. But it doesn't matter. I chose Patricio, not his family. And if he chooses me, we'll handle everything else. She turned and walked quickly toward the exit of the school grounds. Behind her came Remedios' sharp voice. He won't choose you, do you hear? In the end, he always comes back to the family. Esperanza didn't turn around and didn't answer. She was hurrying to meet Patricio, but a new unease had settled inside her. Her mother-in-law's words struck a nerve, perhaps because there was a grain of truth in them. Patricio was waiting for her at the restaurant, nervously checking the time on his watch. When he saw Esperanza, his face lit up and he stood to greet her. I was starting to worry, he said, kissing her. Is everything okay? For a moment, Esperanza wondered whether to tell him about the meeting with his mother. She decided that the truth was better than half measures. I had an interesting encounter near the sports school, she said, sitting down. Your mother offered me money to leave you alone. Patricio froze with his glass of wine halfway to his lips. What? Yes, an entire check with 5 zeros. Esperanza tried to smile, but it didn't quite work. I tore it up, by the way. I hope you're not upset. It could have been a decent seed fund for our new place. Patricio set his glass down so hard that the wine sloshed over the rim. I can't believe it, he muttered. Actually, I can. It's exactly her style. What else did she say? Esperanza hesitated. Some of Remedios' words were still echoing in her head, stirring doubts. Mostly threats. She said I'd regret it, that you always come back to your family, and that I'm not the first girl you've introduced to her. She said the last part more quietly, watching Patricio closely. He looked embarrassed and glanced away. Technically, she's right, he admitted. You're not the first. There was Beatrice 3 years ago. We dated for almost a year. Esperanza nodded, waiting. Patricio took a deep breath. My mother made her life hell. Constant calls, meddling in our plans, criticism. Once she even accidentally ruined Beatrice's dress at a family dinner by spilling sauce on it. In the end, Beatrice couldn't take it and left. And I didn't find the strength to fight for us. He looked up at Esperanza. I was different then, weaker, less sure of myself. And to be honest, I didn't love Beatrice the way I love you. Esperanza was silent, weighing what she'd heard. The Beatrice story confirmed Remedios' words. She did wield enormous influence over her son and didn't hesitate to use it. Why didn't you tell me before? She finally asked. Patricio gave a guilty shrug. I didn't want you to go unprejudiced against my mother. I hoped this time would be different, that they'd accept you, that she had changed. But she hasn't, Esperanza finished for him. And she won't. No, Patricio agreed. But I have. Esperanza, I swear to you it will be different this time. I won't let my mother destroy what we have. He took her hands in his. I know she'll try to turn my father against you, other relatives, even our mutual friends. She'll use any chance to drive a wedge between us. But I'm ready to fight that. The question is, are you? Esperanza thought it over. The coming war with Remedios promised to be exhausting. It meant constant tension, conflict, always being on guard. Was Patricio really worth all that? She looked at him, anxious, sincere, worry in his eyes, and suddenly realized the answer was obvious. I'm ready, she said firmly, but I have one condition. Anything, Patricio agreed quickly. We set the boundaries with your family ourselves. No compromises, no for the sake of family peace. Either they respect our decisions, or we minimize contact. I'm not going to spend my life at war with your mother. Patricio nodded. Fair. I agree. Our life, our rules. He raised his glass. To us, and to our new apartment, where there will be no room for my mother or her mops. Esperanza smiled and clinked glasses with him. To us, and to your mother. After all, if not for her, we wouldn't have realized so quickly how strong our feelings are. They both laughed, and the tension began to ease. Dinner continued pleasantly. They talked about the future, dreamed about setting up their new place, and made plans for a vacation. But Esperanza knew this was only the beginning. Remedios wasn't the type to retreat easily, and although they had won today's battle, the war was far from over. Still, it didn't matter right now. Watching Patricio talk excitedly about ideas for their new home, Esperanza felt certain. Together they could handle anything, even the most domineering, manipulative mother-in-law in the world. The wedding was set for late May, a modest ceremony without fuss, just close friends and family. Remedios reacted predictably to the invitation. She sent Patricio a message about a sudden migraine that, according to her forecast, would last exactly until the day of the ceremony. She's offended, Patricio said, showing Esperanza the message. We didn't consult her about the date, the venue, the guest list. We didn't consult her about anything at all. And how do you feel? Esperanza asked carefully, watching his reaction. Patricio thought for a moment, then unexpectedly smiled. Relieved. Can you imagine if she took charge of organizing our wedding? It wouldn't be a celebration, it would be a power display. The guests would be her friends, the menu her choice, the venue wherever she wants to impress people. He hugged Esperanza. Now we'll have the wedding we want. No pomp, no manipulation. The planning moved ahead. Esperanza chose a simple but elegant dress. Patricio ordered a suit. They found a small restaurant with a cozy courtyard, booked a photographer, and finalized the menu. A week before the wedding, an unexpected call came. While trying on her dress, Esperanza saw an unfamiliar number on the screen. Hello? Esperanza? This is Aurelio, Patricio's father. She hesitated. Since that infamous first meeting, she had seen his father only once, briefly, when they stopped by to pick up some documents from the parental home. He had been distant but polite. Hello, Aurelio. What can I do for you? I wanted to talk about the wedding. Could we meet today, if you're free? Esperanza wavered. It could be a trap. Maybe Remedios had decided to act through her husband. On the other hand, Aurelio had always seemed the more reasonable of Patricio's parents. All right, she agreed at last. Where and when? They arranged to meet at a cafe near his office. Esperanza arrived early, chose a table in the corner with a good view of the room, and ordered tea. Aurelio arrived exactly on time. A tall man in a sharp business suit, with a receding hairline and an attentive gaze. Patricio had inherited his height and eyes from his father. Thank you for agreeing to meet, he said, shaking her hand. Does Patricio know about this conversation? No, she admitted. I decided to hear you out first. Aurelio nodded, as if approving her approach. Wise. He placed his order with the waiter who had come over and turned back to Esperanza. I'll get straight to the point. I know what happened when you met Remedios, and I know about her later attempt to buy you off. Esperanza tensed inwardly but kept her face calm. What are you saying, Aurelio? That I'm on your side, he answered simply, and I always have been. From the moment Patricio told me about the mop incident. Seeing Esperanza's surprise, he chuckled softly. Do you know how many years I've been married to Remedios? 32. And all that time she controlled every aspect of our family life. I allowed it because it was easier. I buried myself in work and business trips, ran away, to be honest. The waiter brought the coffee, and Aurelio took a sip before continuing. When Patricio told me what you did, I burst out laughing. For the first time in many years, someone finally put Remedios in her place. It was liberating. Esperanza looked at him skeptically. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you step in earlier? Because I wanted to see how serious you and Patricio are, he replied. My wife is a complicated person. She knows how to manipulate, pressure, play on guilt. I wanted to be sure you were both ready to stand up to that. He set the spoon aside. And you proved you are, which is why I'm here. With what proposal? Esperanza asked bluntly. Aurelio smiled. I want to pay for your wedding. All of it, start to finish. As a gift. Esperanza shook her head. Thank you, but we can manage on our own. Everything's already arranged. We only have to pay the restaurant and... I insist, Aurelio interrupted gently but firmly. This isn't about control, Esperanza. It's my way of showing I support your decision, and a way to apologize for Remedios' behavior. He took another sip of coffee. Besides, I very much want to be at your wedding. And if Remedios finds out I paid for the celebration she's boycotting, that will be a small and frankly delightful bit of payback for years of control. A mischievous spark flashed in his eyes, so like the one that sometimes appeared in Patricio's. Esperanza couldn't help smiling. Are you sure you want to escalate the conflict with your wife? Aurelio shrugged. You know, at our age you start to realize life's too short to keep giving in. Yes, Remedios will be furious, but maybe it will finally make her understand she can't control everything and everyone. He leaned closer. Patricio deserves happiness, and you seem to make him happy. That's all that matters to me as his father. Esperanza considered it. The offer was tempting, but she couldn't ignore the possible catch. I need to discuss it with Patricio, she said at last. It's our wedding, and the decision has to be ours together. Aurelio nodded. Of course. I didn't expect any other answer. He took a business card from his pocket and handed it to Esperanza. Call me when you decide. No pressure. When Esperanza told Patricio about the meeting, he frowned skeptically at first. Father never went against Mom, he said, studying the card. It's strange. Maybe he's changed too, like you have? Patricio rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Maybe. Lately he really has been more interested in my life, calling more often. And when we met up, he asked about you, making sure Mom couldn't hear. After a long discussion, they decided to accept Aurelio's offer, with the condition that it gave him no right to interfere with their plans. The wedding remained just as they had envisioned, modest and cozy. Only now the bills were covered by Patricio's father. The wedding day was sunny and warm. Esperanza wasn't nervous about the ceremony, but about possible surprises from Remedios. Everything went smoothly, though. Aurelio arrived alone, elegant, in a sharp suit, with a sincere smile on his face. Does she know? Esperanza whispered when he congratulated them after the ceremony. Oh, yes. Aurelio smirked. She knows and she's furious. But that's her problem, not yours. Today is your day. The celebration was a success. Friends laughed, toasts were made, music played. For the first time in a long while, Esperanza felt truly happy and safe. As she and Patricio were about to leave, Aurelio pulled them aside. I have one more gift for you, he said, handing them an envelope. Inside were the documents for the apartment, the one she and Patricio had recently bought. What's this? Esperanza didn't understand. I've put the apartment fully in both your names, Aurelio explained, and equal shares. All payments are made, the loan is paid off. Patricio stared at his father in astonishment. But why? Aurelio put a hand on his son's shoulder. Because I want you to have a home that belongs only to you, with no obligations, no possibility of manipulation from anyone. He looked at Esperanza. And because I believe you're exactly the woman my son needs. Strong, independent, able to protect both herself and him. Esperanza didn't know what to say. This gesture meant much more than material help. It was recognition, support, and a kind of apology for all the years of silent complicity in Remedios' tyranny. Thank you, she said simply, and Aurelio nodded, understanding the unspoken words. Live happily, he said, embracing them both. And don't be afraid to set your own rules, even if it means conflict with family. After the wedding, the newlyweds moved into their apartment, arranged it to their taste, and enjoyed their new, freer life. Remedios continued to ignore them, which, frankly, suited everyone fine. Aurelio, on the contrary, became a frequent guest in their home. It was as if he were making up for lost time, spending time with his son, taking an interest in his work, plans, and hobbies. 2 years passed in relative peace and quiet. Then Esperanza found out she was pregnant, and the calm ended. Remedios appeared the very next day after Patricio told his father the happy news. She called Esperanza when she was home alone. "I hear I'm going to have a grandson," she said without a greeting, in a tone that boded no good. "Or a granddaughter," Esperanza replied evenly. "We don't know the baby's sex yet. It doesn't matter. What matters is that this is my grandchild, and I have the right to take part in raising them." Esperanza drew a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "Remedios, let's be honest. You ignored us for 2 years, didn't congratulate us on the wedding, didn't take an interest in our life, and now suddenly you want to be involved in raising the child." "I was offended," the mother-in-law answered coldly. "You and Patricio didn't show proper respect. But a child is different. A child is the continuation of our line, our family, and I will not allow them to be raised without my involvement." "I'm afraid you don't have a choice," Esperanza said firmly. "We, Patricio and I, will decide who will be involved in raising our child." "We'll see about that," Remedios said threateningly, and hung up. That evening, when Patricio came home from work, Esperanza told him about the call. He shook his head. "I knew she wouldn't leave us alone. Especially now, with a baby on the way." "What are we going to do?" Esperanza asked, stroking her belly. Patricio embraced her. "The same as always. Live our lives, by our rules, and protect our child from any manipulation, even if it comes from Grandma." In the months that followed, Remedios made several attempts to regain control. She showed up at their door with gifts for the baby. She called with useful pregnancy advice, even tried to contact Esperanza's doctor, pretending to be her mother. Each time she met a firm refusal. Esperanza and Patricio stood their ground. Either Remedios learned to respect their boundaries, or she would have no access to their lives. When little Milagros was born, Remedios made one last, desperate attempt. She arrived at the maternity ward with an armful of gifts and a bouquet of flowers, playing the doting grandmother. "I'm so happy," she exclaimed as she walked into the room. "My first granddaughter." Esperanza, exhausted after the delivery but happy, was holding the newborn in her arms. Patricio sat beside her, unable to take his eyes off their daughter. Remedios came closer to the bed, reaching out her hands. "Let me hold this beauty for a moment." Esperanza instinctively pulled the baby closer. Patricio stepped between his mother and his wife. "Mom," he said calmly, firmly, "I'm glad you came, but there are a few rules we need to discuss." "Rules?" Remedios frowned. "What do you mean?" "About how our relationship will work now that we have a daughter," Patricio explained. "If you want to be part of her life, and I hope you do, you'll have to accept our terms." He spoke calmly, without aggression, but with a newfound firmness that was unusual for him. Remedios listened, gradually realizing that the situation had changed irreversibly. Her son was no longer the boy she could manipulate. "What terms?" she asked at last, lowering her hands. "Respect for our decisions as parents. No interfering in her upbringing unless we ask. No gifts we haven't approved. And most importantly, no attempts to turn Milagros against us." Remedios was silent for a long time, digesting what she'd heard. Then her gaze fell on her granddaughter, and something in her face softened. "She looks like you did as a child," she said quietly to Patricio. "The same eyes. And hopefully the same character as her father," Esperanza added gently. Remedios looked at her daughter-in-law, and something like respect flickered in her eyes. "I'll try to follow your rules," she said at last. "For Milagros' sake." It wasn't peace, more of a truce. But for a start, it was enough. When Milagros turned 1, they held a family celebration. Remedios came with her husband, tense but polite. She still didn't approve of her son's choice, still believed she knew best how to raise her granddaughter. Yet she had learned to keep those thoughts to herself. And Esperanza? Sometimes she caught herself casting a meaningful glance at the mop in the corner whenever her mother-in-law started crossing boundaries. And Remedios, noticing those looks, immediately grew quieter and more restrained. It was a strange, imperfect peace. But it worked. In the end, isn't that what matters most in any family, finding a way to live together in spite of differences? That evening, after putting Milagros to bed, Patricio and Esperanza settled onto the couch, and she told him what she'd noticed. "You know, for the first time today your mother didn't try to tell me how to hold the baby or what to feed her. That's progress. Patricio smirked. All thanks to you. And to your mop, of course. Esperanza laughed, snuggling up to her husband. Who would have thought an ordinary mop could change the history of an entire family? It's not the mop, Patricio countered, kissing the top of her head. It's who's holding it. You changed our family, Esperanza. You taught me to be stronger. You taught my father to stand up to manipulation, and even my mother now knows there are lines that can't be crossed. Sounds like I'm some kind of superhero with a mop instead of a sword, Esperanza joked. Maybe, Patricio said seriously, or just the woman who wasn't afraid to defend her dignity. And our future. The 2 years after Milagros's birth passed relatively calmly. Remedios respected the boundaries they had set, though her nature sometimes broke through in stray comments or unsolicited advice. Patricio held the line firmly, not allowing his mother to manipulate the family, and Esperanza learned to respond to her mother-in-law's jabs with humor rather than aggression. Little Milagros grew into an active, curious child whose character somehow blended her father's gentleness with her mother's resolve. At 2 years old, she already knew how to stand her ground, especially when it came to choosing toys or books to read. In the summer, when Milagros was 2.5, something unexpected happened. Aurelio called Patricio to ask for a meeting. Without Remedios, just the two of them. The conversation was not an easy one. "I've filed for divorce," he told his son as they settled into a quiet cafe not far from the company office. After 34 years of marriage, Patricio looked at his father, unable to hide his surprise. "What happened? I thought you and Mom had grown used to each other?" Aurelio smiled bitterly. "Grown used to it? Good word. I grew used to being a silent shadow beside my own wife. For years I convinced myself it was easier, calmer, the right thing." He took a sip of coffee. And then Esperanza appeared. "What does my wife have to do with it?" Patricio frowned. "She showed me it's possible to live differently," Aurelio replied simply. "That you don't have to be afraid to defend your boundaries, that you can love someone and still not let them run your life." He looked at his son. "Watching you two, I started thinking about my own life, about how many years were spent on concessions, on compromises that were really capitulation. And I realized I don't want to spend the years I have left the same way." Patricio nodded slowly, taking it in. "How did Mom take the news?" Aurelio laughed without mirth. "How do you think? At first she didn't believe it, decided I was bluffing. Then came rage, threats, attempts to manipulate. Now it's the heavy artillery. Tears, memories of happy years together, pressure through mutual friends. And you? For the first time in 34 years, I feel like I'm making my own decision. And it's freeing." Patricio was quiet for a moment, thinking it over. "Have you moved out already?" "Yes, I rented an apartment near the office. Temporary, of course. And what happens with the house is part of the problem," Aurelio sighed. "By law, the house is our joint property, though it was mostly paid for with my money. Remedios refuses to sell her share and wants to stay there. But I'm willing to compromise, let the house remain hers if she doesn't lay claim to the business." He looked intently at his son. "Patricio, I wanted to ask you a favor. Talk to your mother. You're the only one she still listens to, at least a little." "And what am I supposed to say?" Patricio faltered. "Mom, let Dad go in peace. Just explain that this divorce doesn't have to turn into a war, that we can part ways civilly, without scandals and court battles, that at our age it's normal." Patricio turned his cup in his hands thoughtfully. "Are you sure you've thought this through? It's a serious step." "More than sure," Aurelio answered firmly. "I deserve a few years of a calm life where I make my own decisions. To be honest, Remedios also deserves a chance to learn to live on her own." When Patricio came home and relayed the conversation to Esperanza, she didn't look surprised. "I suspected it was heading this way," she said, tucking Milagros into bed. "Lately Aurelio has often asked me how I managed to keep you in line. At first I thought he was joking, but then I realized he genuinely admires our relationship." "And you didn't tell me anything? What was I supposed to say? Your father seems to want to divorce your mother because of me?" Patricio shook his head. "It's not because of you. It's because of them. 34 years of an unhealthy relationship where one always submitted and the other always dominated. Will you talk to her? Esperanza asked. I'll try, although I have no idea how she'll react or what I can even say. The conversation with Remedios turned out to be just as difficult as Patricio expected. She met him in the family home, thinner, eyes red from tears, but just as domineering as ever. Your father's lost his mind, she declared as soon as Patricio crossed the threshold. 34 years together, and suddenly a divorce, at our age. Patricio patiently listened to all the accusations against his father, from a midlife crisis to he must have a young mistress. When the torrent of words subsided, he finally managed to speak. Mom, maybe it's better to just let this go. If Dad decided to leave, he must have his reasons. Reasons? Remedios exclaimed indignantly. What reasons could there possibly be for abandoning your family? I was always the perfect wife. I took care of him, kept the house, supported his reputation in society. Patricio let out a deep sigh. Mom, caring means taking another person's wishes into account, not deciding everything for them. What do you know about it? Remedios waved him off. This is all the influence of your wife. She turned you against me first, and now your father. Esperanza has nothing to do with it, Patricio said firmly. Although maybe she really did show us both that relationships can be different, equal, respectful, without manipulation. Remedios snorted. Equal? She has been bossing you around from the very first day, since that ridiculous mop incident. Patricio couldn't help but smile. Actually, that mop incident is when I finally started making my own decisions. And one of those decisions is to support you, despite everything. Because you're my mother, and I love you. He took her hand. But I won't meddle in your relationship with Dad. If he decided to leave, that's his choice, and I respect it. Just like I respect your right to fight for your marriage or let it go. Remedios looked at her son for a long time, as if seeing him for the first time. When did you manage to grow up so much? She asked quietly. When I became a father, Patricio replied simply. And when I realized that happiness isn't about controlling others, but about being yourself and letting others be themselves. He stood up. Think about it, Mom. Maybe this divorce isn't an ending. Maybe it's the beginning of something new for both of you. Leaving the family home, Patricio wasn't sure his words had reached her. Remedios remained adamant, promising to fight for her marriage and not allow the family to fall apart. However, 2 weeks later something unexpected happened. Remedios called and invited them all to dinner, Patricio, Esperanza, and little Milagros. What does that mean? Esperanza asked warily when Patricio told her. Is this some kind of trap? I don't know, he admitted honestly. She sounded strange, calm, without her usual domineering tone. I'm not sure we should go, Esperanza shook her head, especially with Milagros. But curiosity and hope for change won out. On the appointed evening they arrived at the family home, now solely Remedios' house. To their surprise, she greeted them without her usual grandiosity, wearing a simple house dress, minimal makeup, but with impeccably styled hair. Come in, she said, trying to smile. I made dinner. Made was the word that shocked them most. In all the years of family life, Remedios had rarely set foot in the kitchen. There had always been a housekeeper for that. The dinner was simple but quite edible. Remedios fussed around them, adding food to their plates, asking if they liked it, if they needed anything else. Patricio and Esperanza exchanged puzzled looks, unable to understand what was happening. Finally, when little Milagros grew tired of sitting at the table and began to fuss, Remedios suggested, Maybe I can show her the playroom? I prepared something for my granddaughter. Esperanza hesitated. Letting her daughter go off alone with her mother-in-law was risky. Who knew what she might say to the child? But something in Remedios' eyes, asking, almost pleading, made her agree. All right, but I'll come with you. Of course, Remedios agreed quickly. The playroom, formerly a guest bedroom, had been completely transformed. Bright wallpaper with fairy tale characters, a soft carpet, a small toddler bed, shelves filled with toys and books, all of it showed care and thoughtful preparation. There, Remedios said nervously, watching her granddaughter's reaction. I thought Milagros should have her own room for when you visit. The little girl rushed to explore the space with excitement. Esperanza stood stunned, not knowing what to say. That's very kind of you, she finally managed. I've been thinking a lot these past weeks, Remedios said quietly, watching Milagros examine new toys. About what Patricio said about my life, about why Aurelio decided to leave. She turned to Esperanza. I always thought that control was a form of care, that if I decided everything for others, I was making their lives better. But it turned out that they simply leave, Esperanza finished softly. Remedios nodded. Aurelio agreed to my terms for the divorce. The house stays with me, the business stays with him. Everything civil, no scandals. She watched as Milagros chose a book and brought it to Esperanza. You know what's strangest? I feel relieved, as if a huge weight fell off my shoulders. No more needing to control everything, watch over everyone, make every decision. It's freeing. Esperanza carefully sat down, holding her daughter with the book on her lap. Why did you invite us today? She asked directly. Remedios paused, searching for the right words. I wanted to apologize for everything. For how I behaved during our first meeting, for trying to buy you off, for interfering in your life. She took a deep breath. I wanted to ask for a chance to be part of my granddaughter's life, on your terms. Esperanza looked at her mother-in-law, not the imposing matriarch, but just an older woman suddenly left alone in a big house. For the first time in all the years she'd known her, Esperanza felt something like sympathy. That's possible, she said finally, but with a few rules. Anything, Remedios agreed quickly. No manipulation. No attempts to turn Milagros against us. No interference with our parenting decisions. And most importantly, respect. For both of us. Remedios nodded. I'll do my best. Truly, I will. There were tears in her eyes. Perhaps for the first time in years, they were genuine and not manipulative. When they returned to the table where Patricio waited, Esperanza said quietly, I think we can visit once a week. On Sundays, if you like. Remedios didn't answer, but the grateful look in her eyes said more than any words. Another 3 years passed. Little Milagros had become a schoolgirl. She now had a younger sister, Esperanza. Aurelio, who had lived alone after the divorce, surprised everyone a year later by marrying a woman his own age, calm, thoughtful, and respectful of personal boundaries. Remedios went through a period of deep depression, but then, following Patricio's advice, enrolled in landscape design classes. It was an old hobby she had abandoned during her married life. To her own surprise, she discovered real talent and soon founded a small company specializing in private garden landscaping. The weekly Sunday visits became a tradition. Slowly, with great effort, Remedios learned to be a grandmother rather than a commander. Her relationship with Esperanza never grew truly warm, but it developed into respectful coexistence. The mop, the very one that had changed their family's history, was eventually replaced with a new one. But Esperanza kept the old one, hanging it in the utility room of their country house, where the family moved after Esperanza was born. Sometimes, during rare conflicts, a single glance toward that utility room was enough to make Remedios instantly more agreeable. It became their little family joke. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep and Patricio and Esperanza were sitting on the veranda watching the stars, he said thoughtfully, You know, I sometimes think about the day I brought you to meet my parents. About how everything could have turned out differently. Like what? Esperanza asked, leaning against his shoulder. For example, if you hadn't taken that mop. Or if you had taken it but simply set it aside. Submitted, like everyone before you. Esperanza smiled. Then we wouldn't have such a great story for our grandchildren. About how Grandma Esperanza smacked great-grandma with a mop because she tried to make her scrub toilets. Patricio laughed. Sounds like the beginning of a fairy tale. Maybe it is, Esperanza said, lifting her glass of wine. To fateful mops and the courage to follow your heart. And to turning conflict into opportunity, Patricio added, clinking glasses with her. They sat in silence, enjoying the peace and each other's closeness. Somewhere inside the house the children breathed softly in their sleep, leaves rustled in the trees, cicadas chirped in the grass. Life went on, with all its challenges, joys, ups and downs. And in that moment Esperanza thought that perhaps true love wasn't the absence of problems, but the ability to face them together. Not perfect happiness, but shared memories, funny and painful alike. Not a fairy tale about a charming prince, but a real story about someone who grows and changes beside you. As for the notorious mop, maybe sometimes you really do have to shake up the established order to open the path to something new and better, even if it means showing character and going against the current. What are you thinking about? Patricio asked, noticing her dreamy smile. That sometimes the most ordinary thing becomes the most important, Esperanza replied. Who would have thought a mop could change our whole life? Patricio shook his head. Not the mop. You changed our life. The mop was just a tool. Esperanza laughed and kissed her husband. In the end, he was right. Mops come and go, but real change always begins with a person's decision to be themselves, to defend their boundaries, and to not be afraid to walk their own path, even when the whole world insists it's impossible.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.